Hello and welcome to The World This Week with me, Gavin Lee, live in Paris every week discussing the biggest stories of the past 7 days with a panel of our 4 distinguished correspondents. Our programme now selected is one of the best 100 podcasts in the world for current affairs, so thank you for watching. In a week that's seen a deepening rift in relations between Israel and its Western allies, the first explicit threat of sanctions from leaders of France, the UK and Canada if IDF troops don't stop the renewed military offensive to take control of the whole of Gaza. It came after the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, announced minimal humanitarian aid would restart. A drop in the ocean, said the UN. And on Thursday, Israel explicitly blamed Paris, London and Ottawa for creating an atmosphere of hatred that led to the killing of a young couple in Washington, Israeli embassy staff, who were shot dead outside a Jewish museum.
There is a direct line connecting anti-Semitic and anti-Israeli incitement to this murder. This incitement is also done by leaders and officials of many countries and international organizations, especially from Europe.
It's been a week where French officials have warned of the threat to the core secular values of the country due to the spread of Islamism and a calculated campaign by the organisation the Muslim Brotherhood. The report's authors say the group's French offshoot is covertly spreading Islamist ideology by infiltrating local institutions known as entryism. The far left accuse the government of Islamophobia. The far right has called for the Muslim Brotherhood to be banned.
There is a big difference between what has been called separatism and entrism. Separatism aims to create small counter-societies which separate from the national community, whereas entrism aims to profoundly modify our own rules for the whole community of citizens.
And it's been a week of revelations and cover-up allegations in the US. On Sunday, it was announced that former President Joe Biden had been diagnosed with an aggressive and advanced form of prostate cancer. Tributes and initially kind messages from the Republicans soon turned to suspicion, skepticism. President Trump and his vice president insinuated without evidence that the Democrats have been hiding the news for some time, while others in the party suggested the cancer diagnosis was deliberately released to distract from the publication of a tell-all book of his time in office. Original Sin came out 2 days later. His supporters described the comments as unfounded attacks from soulless ghouls.
I think it's very sad, actually. I'm surprised that it wasn't, the public wasn't notified a long time ago, because to get to stage 9, that's a long time.
And the distinguished journalist joining me on this week's programme, with us in the studio, Vivienne Waltz. Evening, Viv. She is the foreign correspondent for Time magazine, Fortune magazine for the past 2 decades, a journalist who's covered some of the world's biggest global events in that time, the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, narrowly escaping a bullet fired into her car in Fallujah. Has been nominated twice for a Pulitzer Prize for her work in Africa. Great to have you with us, Viv. Let's start on the reality TV show we'll call Welcome to the Oval Office. OK, this week it was a turn South African President Cyril Ramaphosa meeting Trump. Some have called it an ambush. What do you make of it?
I think it was totally an ambush, but it was not an ambush that Ramaphosa did not foresee. He knew that he was going to walk into, a show in which he had a walk-on role. He was not one of the directors, and he had to simply kind of throw himself into it. Of course, he did not expect the video. But, the reports out of South Africa, the assessment is a little bit mixed. People saying, well, at least we didn't get Zelensky'd, meaning, he didn't get completely humiliated. And I think he put on as good a face as he possibly could under the circumstances. He kept his cool. He had this kind of wit about him, for which he's pretty famous. And he also made it clear that he didn't believe any of the kind of fake video, and it truly was fake, that Trump, showed him. There is one thing that has to be said about South Africa. This is not just a normal country. This is a country for which has really defined the whole struggle for racial equality for a century. And so as much as Trump sought to kind of belittle him and pin, false claims on him, in the eyes of the world, this is a country that's most defined by Nelson Mandela, by kind of, struggle for truth and justice and everything else. And so Ramaphosa walks into that office, as humiliating as it is, with some degree of global credibility.
In a country where you cut your teeth as a journalist as well, it was pretty much another watch behind your hands moment. Let's take a look at those moments that Viv was just talking about.
Let me see the articles, please, if you would, and turn the lights down, and just put this on. It's right behind you, Johan.
There's nothing this parliament can do. With or without you, people are going to occupy land. We require no permission from you, from the president, from no one. We don't care. We can do whatever you want to do. Who are you to tell us whether we can occupy land or not? So these people, when you want to hit them hard.
Now this is very bad. These are burial sites right here. Burial sites.
There's a kind of David Brent about this moment of those who've watched The Office will relate to, but the burial site allegations, Viv, that's caused a lot of blowback in South Africa. As you said, that was seen to be complete fake news.
Yes, I mean, it wasn't the only fake news. He also showed bodies which turned out to be bodies of people in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and not South Africa, some, many hundreds of miles away. Yes, it was a hodgepodge, and if anybody knows anything about Africa, it was clearly a very kind of amateurish attempt at cooking up a story. But that almost doesn't matter. I mean, Trump is playing to his base. He's not playing to kind of experts in Africa, He doesn't care what they think. And but even on that level, I'm not sure it worked.
Viv, it is great to have you, as always. Let's also bring in Rob Parsons. Evening, Rob. World Affairs commentator, formerly France 24's chief foreign editor, once upon a time the BBC's Moscow correspondent, who remembers, you will, life in Russia before Putin was in power. Fantastic to have you back.
And when he was in power.
And when he was. Tell us about life in the wilds. Have you missed us?
Yes. It's ingrained in me, I think, to wake up every morning and just start trawling through, what's been happening in the world. It's a habit I can't get out of, So in that sense, yes.
On the subject of Oval Office bust-ups with talking with Viv, last time you were here for the programme, there was the night of the Trump-Zelensky row. Tell us about what you're making since then, the state of progress towards a Ukraine peace deal.
Yeah, I mean, we were just talking about this a moment or two ago. There are similarities, obviously, between the Zelensky incident and Ramaphosa as well. And Ramaphosa had the benefit of arriving, having seen what happened to Zelensky. And I'm sure he was expecting a similar sort of show, although it wasn't as appalling as what we witnessed with Zelensky, who was unfortunate enough to make the effort to conduct the whole interview with Trump in his third language, put him at a huge disadvantage. It was humiliating. He was exhausted anyway after his long trip. But so, Ramaphosa was spared that. But since then, the situation obviously very tense in Ukraine. It hasn't gone quite as badly as the Ukrainians had feared in the relationship with the United States. Trump is just about still on board, although appearing to hover at the moment on the issue of whether to withdraw from the negotiations altogether and leave Ukraine and Russia to sort it out amongst themselves, as he put it. But the situation isn't good for Ukraine. They're looking at what they can do going forward, trying to strengthen the relationship with the European Union, with NATO, so that if the United States does pull out, it's not certain that they will. The debate goes on in Congress. There's a majority in the Senate for giving more support to Ukraine. The majority of the American population, about 66%, I think it is, still supports the idea of providing weapons to Ukraine. So it's not lost yet, but in the meantime, Ukrainians are having to look very closely at themselves and decide how they take these things forward. And I was watching your program earlier on today. You were talking about the issue of what sort of defense strategy should Ukraine be taking in the months and possibly years ahead, does it make sense for Ukraine to be thinking in terms of trying to liberate lands currently occupied by the Russians? Given their own experience in 2023 when they went on the counteroffensive and suffered pretty severe losses. So given that, given the knowledge they have that the Russians have, if anything, entrenched themselves still further in those occupied areas, they're beginning to look now at the possibility of concentrating entirely, almost entirely on defense and switching away from the sort of warfare that has been largely conducted over the last couple of years or so towards a much more tech-based warfare, using concentrations of drones over a 10 to 15 kilometer depth strip all the way along the border to make life extremely difficult and costly for the Russians if and when they go on the offensive, as is expected, sometime this summer.
Very interesting. And plus, if you follow this and look on the website as well, not just drones and motorcycle recently, becoming a big part of the conflict and firing from them. Rob, great to have you here. Independent, unleashed. You can say what you want. Great to have you. Let's go to Brussels. Let's bring in Susana Freixas. Evening, Susana. Long time EU correspondent for Portuguese broadcaster SIC News, as well as one of the country's most widely read publications, The Espresso Weekly. Susana, just as people are relaxing, watching this, getting ready for the weekend, Trump is keeping you up at night. More tariffs.
Yes, definitely. It was a very tough day, lots of work, because of course we are not expecting this tweet or post, I must say, from Donald Trump on this social media that he owns. And probably it was also a surprise to the European Commission, because the European Commission, only a few days ago, the commissioner in charge of trade was saying, well, we agreed with the Americans to intensify negotiations. So they were clearly trying to get a deal. And now they have this news that Donald Trump is recommending this 50% tariff on European Union. So, I mean, it's not really clear if this 50% tariff is on top of the tariffs that are already in place. And let's not forget that those tariffs that Trump imposed on cars, for instance, European cars, they are working, so they were not suspended. And we don't know if this 50% will also affect specific sectors as lumber or, for instance, pharmaceuticals or connectors. And this is quite sensitive because so far the Americans haven't targeted those specific sectors, and that was taken as good news by the European Union. So now we don't know exactly if he wants to just target every single product. And of course, we see also the reactions, not only by the capitals, so different capitals, and you see the biggest European economies reacting, Berlin, Paris, Italy, even the Netherlands was reacting to this. So, and also you see some sectors, and the car sector in Germany is really, really worried about this because 50% tariff on cars. It's already bigger than what we have right now, and we have 25. It's really unbearable for this sector that, as you know, is already suffering a lot. And I'm talking about the car sector in Germany.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, and also the other way to look at this, and I guess there's an atmosphere to some extent of keep calm and carry on, because this could just be an opening gambit to get the negotiations started. The other thing, Susana, when I was correspondent in Brussels, our paths would cross, just thinking about social media. X, Twitter back then, was the place that you would see constant updates into the evening tonight on Trump, say, journalist scoops, bits of info. These days, long gone, it seems, drowned out by ads, viral bait chasers. Where do you go now to double check what's going on in all of those 27 member states? Is it old-fashioned chinwag conversations?
Well, it's true. It's not even fair. I don't think this is a good thing for democracy, to be honest, that you get reactions from different governments and sometimes from leaders, as you know, heads of government and state via Twitter, or via Twitter. It's no longer Twitter, it's X, or via other kind of social media. But it's true that more and more they try to bypass the journalists. This is obvious, as you know, and it's it's not different in Brussels. Also, the European Commission does that a lot more and more. Ursula von der Leyen speaks more through X or other social media. Then she goes to. It's rare. We rarely see her at the press room, if you want. So even today, of course, it was a little bit different because the ministers were not really posting things. They were speaking to the media. So it was a little bit different today. But I also think this happened because journalists had the opportunity of, I don't know, for instance, in the Polish minister, the trade Polish minister was here in Brussels for a competitiveness council. And so he had no option to answer to the journalists. So in that case, we got an answer by a traditional mean. But for instance, also in Germany, I think it was a little bit the same. The foreign affairs minister was also reacting to the journalists. Yeah. But we are still waiting for the Commission, and it's for the Commission to deal and to make an agreement with the United States. But we are still waiting for the Commission to react, and probably because they are still trying to understand what's going on. And as you know, I can just checking the phone to see if there's any news.
Well, you've got a working weekend ahead. You're not going to stop.
Yeah. It's just that Maroš Šefčovič, the Trade Commissioner, was on a phone call with his counterparts, American counterparts. So, and we are waiting on our WhatsApp group to see what is the reactions here.
Great to have you on the programme, Susanna, and I'll forgive you for looking at your phone every now and again to check what's going on. Let's head to London. Let's bring in Andrew Palmer. Good evening, Andrew. The Economist columnist who writes under the pen name Bartleby, focusing on evolving dynamics of the workplace and business culture. Andrew's the author of Smart Money. He's also the presenter of the Economist's Boss Class podcast, a very binge-worthy series, now in its second season. Andrew, you describe it as advice on how to be a better boss by people who've actually done the job.
Yes. Hi, Gavin. Nice to be here. So this is really aimed at people who've gone into management, don't quite know how to do it. So 4 in 5 managers here in the UK have had no training at all. Most managers get into that position because they're good at something else, and that's not necessarily good for their subordinates. So there's a great mass of people who have managerial responsibility, don't quite know what to do it, and our goal with the podcast is to try and help them.
Well, let's take a quick look.
How many times in your life have you had a great boss? You probably won't need too many fingers to count them. It doesn't have to be this way. The Economist is back with a second season of Boss Class. This time we've gathered management tips from the bosses of the world's best-known companies, from Google to Levi's.
A brief mention, Andrew, one very fascinating interview and very prescient right now, your conversation with Liz Reed, Vice President, Head of Search at Google. She takes you into the whole world of AI chatbot searches and how they calibrate what they think we want in a search.
Yeah, fascinating interview. So she's in charge, basically, of trying to protect Google from the predations of AI and to protect that search engine business. And they're doing that in part by introducing something called AI overviews, which are the summaries that we see at the top of a search page. And that process by which they kind of refine and iterate and innovate is interesting in itself. And she's just very interesting on kind of some of our habits. So with AI, for example, we're now able to ask longer, more complicated questions than we were in the past with search. She's trying to untrain us from all of the bad habits we got into with the old version of Google and try to encourage us to do more natural searching.
Yeah, and I notice as well, everything matters on a search as well, whether you wait 200 milliseconds more, some people get impatient and move on. Andrew, great to have you with us. We'll begin in the Middle East. Monday morning, a video posted on the Israeli Prime Minister's official Telegram channel, Benjamin Netanyahu, announcing that Israeli forces would take control of the whole Gaza Strip in the attempt to defeat Hamas and its infrastructure. He said Palestinians would be evacuated from the north to the south. There will be a resumption of a limited amount of humanitarian aid after almost 3 months of blockade. Within hours, 5 aid trucks entered the strip. By late afternoon, private diplomatic pressure from Western leaders was now being made public. A joint letter calling on Israel to stop, signed by President Macron, Keir Starmer, Mark Carney, making clear their outrage at the renewed offensive, and for the first time explicitly threatening sanctions on Israeli actions in Gaza. Meanwhile, Tom Fletcher, the UN humanitarian chief, warned that 14,000 babies could die in 48 hours without aid, then rolled back the comments, having been accused of being misleading after it emerged that the figure referred to of babies at risk of severe malnutrition over the next 11 months. By Thursday, Israel hit back at the three leaders and the UN misquote too, with Benjamin Netanyahu blaming that rhetoric and threats for amplifying an atmosphere which led, he said, to the murder of a young couple, two Israeli embassy workers in the US, who were shot dead in the street in Washington, D.C. by a gunman who shouted, "Free Palestine," after the shooting.
They want Israel to stand down and accept that Hamas's army of mass murderers will survive, rebuild, and repeat the October 7th massacre again and again and again, because that's what Hamas has vowed to do. I say to President Macron, Prime Minister Carney, and Prime Minister Starmer, when mass murderers, rapists, baby killers, and kidnappers thank you, you're on the wrong side of justice. You're on the wrong side of humanity. And you're on the wrong side of history.
Vivian, let's start with you. To what extent do you believe this is a tipping point week between allies? There's a lot of hostility, and just listening to that quote as well, you are on the wrong side of history, he said.
You know, there's another line which we didn't show, in which he said that the phrase "Free Palestine" was equivalent to saying "Heil Hitler." Clearly something incredibly incendiary to say to European leaders, particularly. But there's one ally that we haven't spoken about, and that's the US. So you have Trump, who's just come back from the Middle East on a whole swing of the region. And not only did he not go to Israel, but he barely mentioned Israel in the week that he was there. And this must be just kind of unprecedented, I think. So suddenly Netanyahu is put in this position of being almost irrelevant. He's not somebody in Trump's mind who can give him anything. In fact, he takes everything. It's $3 billion a year in aid. And he can't prosecute this war without US aid. So I think that he's in a really tough position. He's lost the country. 70% of Israelis now, according to the polls, want him out, want an end to the war, want basically that the release of the remaining hostages to be the priority and not destruction of Hamas as the priority.
It's interesting your point about saying Free Palestine. Rob is essentially saying Heil Hitler. He qualified it, or tried to qualify it, by saying that Friedrich Merz, German Chancellor, was recently in Israel. He agreed with him. He said that Hamas were like the modern Nazis, and then he went on into the sort of tangents as he did. And we've been here before, Rob. You've been back and forth constantly to Israel, to the West Bank as well. Criticism of the state becomes conflated with criticism of anti-Semitism.
Yeah, it's always been the case with Benjamin Netanyahu. He tries to bully his critics into silence by using the anti-Semitic tag. It doesn't seem to be working now, and I think Vivian's absolutely right. The issue now is how much support is Netanyahu going to get as we go down the line with this from the United States. I mean, I'm a little bit confused at the moment by the position of the United States. It is absolutely true, of course. Trump went to Saudi Arabia, went to the Emirates, and he didn't go to Israel. He didn't talk about Israel the whole time he was there. At the same time of that, he's opened negotiations with Iran on the nuclear issue. He's been talking to the Syrian leader, ending sanctions against Syria, against the wishes of Israel. There are several things happening all at once, but the support is still there. There hasn't been overt criticism from the United States, from Donald Trump, about Netanyahu's and his government's intentions in Gaza, as far as I am aware, at least anyway. So, I'm a little bit confused about what the signal is, if you're Netanyahu at the moment, coming from the United States.
It's a very good point, Andrew. Just listening to Rob, Axios news agency reporting this week that Trump had been making similar comments to what we heard from President Macron, Keir Starmer, Mark Carney, in private in recent days, but not publicly. What do you make of that?
Well, I guess the political imperatives require him to be publicly shoulder to shoulder with Israel. So I think, again, as your guests have said, the interesting thing is kind of the absence of things, not talking about Israel on the visit, striking a deal with the Houthis where American interests are protected, but Israeli interests are not, the actions with Syria. So I wouldn't expect Trump to break publicly with Israel. But the fact that he is not very overtly manifesting support for Netanyahu is interesting in itself.
Susanna, it's interesting we're quiet on the US side, but this has gone beyond discomfort, hasn't it, and private diplomacy. Beyond the three capitals, we're now talking about within the EU, the pausing of a trade deal.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that the European Union doesn't have the same power as the United States to put pressure on Israel. That's for sure. We know it for quite some time. But that doesn't mean that the EU doesn't have the instruments to put at least some pressure. Of course, we cannot expect sanctions as the Swedish government proposed this week, and the government of Sweden proposed some sanctions against individuals and specifically ministers from Netanyahu's government. And we see that some other countries are supporting that, including my own, including Portugal, France, Spain. But the majority, of course, there's no unanimity to move forward with such kind of sanctions. Then you were mentioning the trade agreement or the association agreement with Israel. Let's not forget that the European Union is the largest Israel trading partner. So we have some leverage, of course, we as the European Union. Of course, the fact that the minister said, or the majority, because it's not unanimity, but 17 out of 27 said we should review the agreement. So does this mean that the agreement is going to be suspended? I don't think so. Or at least not the political side of the agreement, because that requests, you need unanimity in order to suspend such an agreement, and you don't have it. And we see that Germany still says that, well, we don't want to cut relations with Israel. We don't think that reviewing the agreement is the way forward. So as you know, Germany is against this review of the agreement. But of course, there is a lot of this content of discomfort. I think that more and more leaders think that this is outrageous. You see Emmanuel Macron speaking about a massacre. You see also Sanchez, the leader of the Spanish government, saying that Israel is a state of genocide, which is quite strong. Even Portuguese Prime Minister Montenegro this week was saying, for the first time, he went to X to say that what is happening in Gaza, the humanitarian situation is unbearable. So let's see. They are trying to put some political pressure on, and it's just one last thing, because we must say that European leaders are not in favor of Hamas. They are not supporting Hamas. That's for sure. But the European Union is given so much money for humanitarian aid, and we are already talking about 170 million this year, that at least the EU has this responsibility to make sure that this humanitarian aid that Europeans are paying for, it gets in Gaza.
It's very interesting. And also, just Josep Borrell, recently the former Foreign Affairs chief for the EU, used the term, talk about genocide, ethnic cleansing in Gaza in a speech to the Spanish, when he was receiving an award from the Spanish king, to which Israel rejects all allegations of genocide. There is a case at the ICJ brought by South Africa, which is ongoing. Rob, bring you back in here, because one thing that strikes me, it's been put to me by opposition in Israel about what's going on. We're seeing this week, I should say, a number of criticisms, including Yair Golan, opposition leader who is likened what was going on to killing babies as a hobby. Now, he's been struck down by Benjamin Netanyahu for this, a lot of criticism. It's been put to me that there's there just isn't a space for dialogue on Palestinian suffering in Israel Parliament, Israeli news channels right now, because the trauma of October the 7th is so deep. Is that what you find when you're Israel? When you put the TV on, when you're looking for images of Gaza, what are you seeing?
Well, I think that's right. And part of the reason for that, though, is that when you're in Israel, among Jewish Israelis, you don't see very much of the suffering in Gaza. You hear a lot about the suffering, obviously, of the hostages and the trauma of October the 7th for understandable reasons. So, they're very much fixated on that side of things. So there's a boiling anger about how you take this forward and very little consideration, despite what we're hearing, as just mentioned from Israeli opposition figures over the last few days, very little consideration for the plight of Palestinian Arabs inside Gaza, and not very much of a debate either about what you do with Gaza going forward. Okay, send the army in. There's a lot of support for that, but the debate about what happens in Gaza once it's all over has not really even begun. And at the moment, what we're left with are these sort of vituperative debates. I was just reading something in one of the Israeli papers just yesterday in Haaretz from a debate about a week or so ago, in which members of the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, reacted with absolute condescension towards the remarks made by a doctor who was commenting on the situation in Gaza, saying that we all share the suffering of Gazan children. We all want to ensure that Gazan children get medicines, if they're sick or if they need amputations and that sort of thing. And these MPs were saying, who on earth do you think you're talking for? We don't want them to get those medicines. We don't want them to be treated. We want them to leave. And there is no debate, really.
Yeah. Rob, good to have your thoughts with us. OK, let's take you from the scenes in Gaza. We'll be back there, no doubt, next week. But this time last year, here in France, the government commissioned a report on the influence of the Islamist group, the Muslim Brotherhood, an organisation banned across most of the Arab world, though permitted in Tunisia, Turkey, promoted, supported in Qatar. It was part of a broader assessment to look at the group's French offshoot and address Islamist separatism in French society. Now, the report came back this week, 73 pages, presented to the president on Wednesday, classified as a low-level concern to the French state. But leaked excerpts were released to the press, to Le Figaro, which sparked wider concern. It emerged the group is considered a threat to national security. It identified the group, the Federation of Muslims of France, as a national brand of the Brotherhood, involved in a long-term strategy to undermine French society, its secular values, a method described as entryism, infiltration at local small-level institutions, schools, local government, in the attempt to reshape society from the bottom up. It highlights subversive designed to gradually bring about changes to local and national rules. Well, what comes next will be a government strategy of how to deal with it, expected in the coming week. Now, the group FMF calls the accusation a slap in the face, unfounded, and we had reaction across the political spectrum. First, let's hear from the Interior Minister.
The report indicates that there are two threats, a threat to the fundamental interests, in particular of the republican systems of our institutions, but also to national cohesion.
Well, we heard from the National Rally President, Jordan Bardella, as well, who said, if we come to power, we will ban the Muslim Brotherhood. This movement must be considered a terrorist organisation, will close down radical mosques, expel radical foreign imams and challenge the tax treaty with Qatar. We also heard from the hard left as well, Jean-Luc Mélenchon from La France Insoumise, France Unbowed, who said, this time Islamophobia has crossed a threshold, he said. A defence council around the president gives credence to delusional themes of Retailleau and Le Pen. Let's get a sense of the panel here, and let's start with you, Vivienne. How much of a challenge do you think this is for President Macron right now to deal with the findings, the sensitivities involved as well?
I mean, I think there's a lot to unpack here. I have no doubt that there are, individuals within the country of France who would like to do harm to this very, very secular country. So, country that has made secularism an absolutely defining issue. I did read the reports of the report, and it seems rather overblown. the response. It's a political response. Firstly, it was leaked, most likely by the Interior Minister himself, who would like to succeed Macron in the Élysée, and who is clearly trying to kind of fill a vacuum that has been left by the probable absence of Marine Le Pen in the next election. So you have all this local politics playing out. But what did the report say and what did it not say? It said that there was no violent threat. It said that there was no imminent threat.
It was a subtle infiltration, didn't it? There's no not.
What does that mean? I mean, only the French could invent a word like entryism.
Yes.
But what does that actually mean? I mean, it seems to me, and maybe I'm alone here on this panel in thinking this, but you have 7% of places of worship that have some kind of influence by the local affiliate to the Muslim Brotherhood. That's not very much of a threat. Entryism means essentially that maybe Muslim French are getting much more engaged in things like local elections, the schools, and so on. It's always struck me as a kind of foreigner in France as to why it's taken so long. I mean, you have...
if I just join in on that. So, and what is actually wrong with entryism anyway? You know, that's what you do if you're in politics. Is you try to use the system, you know, to get your goals realized.
I mean, you have, you know, hundreds of American cities now with black mayors. There's a reason why that's happened. Black Americans sought to engage with the system in order to get some political power.
Now, there's a quote here. What is entryism? What stuff? Report found, quote, subversive and designed to gradually bring about changes to local or national rules, particularly those concerning secularism and gender equality. And to that point, Rob, let me throw this to you as well. Austria looked at this, and Austria decided to ban the Muslim Brotherhood as an organisation. And there's an issue in the UK now as well, looking at going back a few years and noting a, quote, highly ambiguous relationship between the Muslim Brotherhood with violent extremism and potential to influence British society. Now, that is different, as Vivian said here. We're not talking about violence. And the other point to which Vivian is saying, we're dealing with a civil servant report. This is not an intelligence services report.
Yeah, I mean... You know, first of all, I have to address Vivian's first point. I do think a lot of this is being politicised at the moment. You know, Retailleau has just been appointed head of his party. You know, he's likely going to be a presidential candidate in 2027. You know, we've been hearing from Marine Le Pen, you know, arguing the toss around. It's clearly, you know, Retailleau wants to steal the wind from the nationalists. But, you know, we're talking about pretty small figures here as well. You know, the budget is apparently €300,000. Doesn't strike me as being an awful lot. Doesn't sound terribly.
It's your month's salary, isn't it? It's your wages in a month, Rob.
It's not terribly threatening. You know, I don't know. I just feel that an awful lot is being made out of this for political reasons rather than anything else. You know, again, to repeat what Vivian said, I'm sure there are people inside les musulmans de France, you know, the French Muslims. This is what they call themselves. Incidentally, they deny that they're the same as the Muslim Brotherhood. I'm sure there are some members who are hostile towards the French state and would love to do anything to undermine the French state. But realistically, standing where we are today, what chance is there of that by this group?
And if we're dealing with leaks and not the actual report, we wait to see the actual report to get some credence. Great to hear both your thoughts on that. Let's go to what we've seen this week in Europe. Elections in 3 countries this week. One key point in common, the continuing rise of the nationalist hard right, despite pro-European centrists winning on the day. In Romania, the Bucharest mayor, Nicolae Dan, defeating the extreme right candidate, George Simion, in the runoff of a rerun election after the controversial cancellation of the result last year, when a little-known scientist turned anti-EU nationalist, Călin Georgescu, stormed in the first round thanks to Russian interference, concluded the Supreme Court. Here's the victor this time round.
Începând de mâine, o nouă etapă.
Romania starts a new phase tomorrow, and it needs each of you. It needs specialists to get involved in different public policies. It needs people in civil society. It needs new people in politics. And as you have proven that you can do this campaign, please continue to be active for Romania.
Și așa cum ați dovedit că puteți să faceți campania asta, vă rog să continuați să activați pentru România.
Then across the border to Poland, the first round won by another centrist, another mayor, this time of Warsaw, Rafał Trzaskowski, who in the runoff, well, next weekend, against the nationalist candidate Karol Nawrocki, although the combined far-right votes for all candidates in the first round took 60% of the vote this time, so nothing straightforward there. And to Portugal, snap general election was won by the party already in power, the centre-right Democratic Alliance. Not enough for a majority in the far-right Chega party, standing on an anti-immigration, anti-corruption platform, made historic gains. And so to Susana, talk us through the aftermath of the Portuguese elections. What's your analysis? What do we need to know?
Well, first of all, from the European perspective, so this is, I would say, from the Brussels perspective, this is good news that you have a pro-European, you will have a pro-European government in Portugal, and it's true that Luís Montenegro has not been nominated so far, so the president is still listening and hearing the different political parties, but I would say for sure is going to be, and he will remain as Portuguese Prime Minister. So, and this is of course good news, and you also have it in Romania, where the president is also pro-European. And I say the president because in the Romanian case, it's the president that goes to the European Council. So from that point of view, you will not have any change at the table of the European Council. So both Portugal and Romania will remain as pro-European leaders sitting at the table. Poland, we still don't know, but there's a great possibility that the president is also going to be pro-European. But in that case, it's not the president goes to the European Council. So the Polish Prime Minister is still Mr. Donald Tusk, which is, as you know, pro-European. In terms of Portugal, it's true that for many people, it was a surprise that Chega, so the far-right party, became the second largest party. It's not set on stone yet, because we are still waiting from some voters and for those that vote outside, for those Portuguese people voting outside Portugal.
Yes.
But it's almost certain that they are going to be the second largest party, and this is new, because like 7 years ago it was not like that. So like in 2017, Chega, so the far-right party, got one seat. Now we see we have 58,
23% of the
and
vote
they
now,
can
something
go
like that,
to
isn't it?
60. Yeah, it's a lot.
Well, it's interesting
it's
because
we're
seeing two things, aren't we? A shrinking of the centre, but not enough, and not quite, or certainly in the view of Chega right now, that they are on the rise. A lot of people kind of fighting for MAGA hats right now as well. Andrew, I want to get to you here, because a lot of the populist parties have been trying to get their pictures with President Trump, including André Ventura of the Chega party in Portugal. What's your takeaway? I mean, going back to where we started at the start of the programme, the key themes for leadership here, the methods, the themes of the campaign, the performance that we're seeing from the populists, what have you made of it?
This is an ongoing process. Obviously you have individual election results that liberals might grab onto as, right, we're coming back, or MAGA-rights might say is evidence of a continuing wave. But actually this is just a kind of years, potentially decades-long battle between the sort of cultural populist right and what you might describe as a sort of liberal left centrist block of parties. So from Romania, I take anti-system candidates got through, not the big parties. Poland is still very much in play. It's hard to say that, one has the upper hand, but it is not over. It's an ongoing battle.
Thank you, Andrew. Great to talk to you. Thank you to all the panel tonight. Insight, clarity, worthy of a standing ovation. In the spirit of Cannes Festival this week, it was a 19-minute non-stop applause for the new bookie's favourite, For the Palme d'Or, which is the Norwegian film Sentimental Value. Thank you, Andrew Palmer in London. From The Economist, the economist Bartleby, presenter of Boss Class as well, the podcast. In Brussels, Susanna Frexis, the EU correspondent for SIC News and the columnist for Espresso newspaper. And here in the studio, joined by Vivian Walt, Paris correspondent for Time, Pulitzer Prize nominated foreign correspondent, and to Rob Watson as well, World Affairs.
Rob Parsons.
Rob Parsons, I do apologise. World Affairs commentator, not lost
Don't
it.
confuse me with Rob Watson.
The long-time chief foreign affairs commentator, editor as well at France 24. Not lost it. We'll be with you soon again, Rob. Stay with us. We'll see you in 7 days for The World next week with Rob Parsons.